when you think about your product, ways of augmenting your product, making it work for customers in their own contexts, using an API, you need to think about how much that will cost you, your company. So the way we can look at cost of integration, it's very easy. It is. I'm glad that you find it amusing. How many people know what CAC is? CAC, customer acquisition cost. Okay, cool. So this formula is taken from the customer acquisition cost, concept. So instead of talking about customer acquisition cost, we talk about cost of integration. So where customer acquisition cost was related to each customer, so the cost of all the activities needed to acquire or to close one deal, to bring one new customer. In this case, it's the cost associated with all the activities needed in order to implement and release one integration. So you're talking about a sum of all the development costs. So if you don't have an API, obviously you need to develop the API in order to build the integration. So you need to add the costs of developing the API. If you already have an API, but you need a specific feature, you need to add the cost of developing that feature. And then all the maintenance costs, meaning all the costs of keeping the API up and running over time, and all the support costs, all the costs of supporting these new users that you will suddenly have. Because after the integration takes place, suddenly your product and your audience will expand a little further. So those users hopefully will become customers, and some of them will need help somehow. So that's also one cost that needs to be accounted for. So another way of looking at this is to look at it from a time perspective. So the cost of integration over time. So what usually happens in the very beginning is the development cost is 100% of total cost. So you're just developing the API, developing the integration. And over time, it gets to a point where you're not developing anything further. So let's say the integration is finished, it's released, tested, and so on, and you don't need to add further development. Yes? Yes, good question. Sorry. So the second cost here is the cost of maintenance. And the maintenance starts, 0%, so doesn't have any impact on the total cost. But over time, and right after the release, what happens is that you'll probably have bugs. So you'll need to spend time fixing those bugs. You'll probably need to add a new feature now and then, and so on. And this flat line here is actually the cost of keeping the system up and running. So it's basically infrastructure plus all the activities that are required to keep your API and the integration up and running over time. The third cost, it's the cost of support. So where you had almost zero cost for development, low cost or costs tending to zero or to a very low value for maintenance, the support will grow, the support cost will grow with the user base growth as well. So the more users you will have, the more time you will have to spend on support, basically. So again, the idea here is to think about this cost for each integration. So this is what I want to transmit here. Because if we don't think about each cost for each integration, if we think about the API or the product in general, we won't be able to understand if each one of the integrations that you're trying to create is generating growth for your business. And this is what the talk is about, right? So the other factor to let us understand how to get to growth is actually the lifetime value of the integration. So how many people here are familiar with the concept of LTV, lifetime value? So again, lifetime value is applied to customers. We are applying it to the integration. So the goal here is to sum all the LTVs for the integration cohort. So basically, you first need to be able to measure where your customers come from, then identify all the new customers that are actually using one particular integration, and calculate the lifetime value for those customers. And then you have the lifetime value for the integration. So in the end, you'll be able to look at each one of those integrations and see how much each integration is valued, basically. And the final piece of the puzzle is, again, going back to SAAS terminology, is the payback period. So the payback period can be calculated by dividing the cost of integration by the monthly recurring revenue for that particular integration. Again, we're talking about cohorts. Each cohort is one integration. So it shouldn't be hard to identify a list of all the customers that are using one particular integration, and with that you can find the MRR, you can find the lifetime value and all that. So how do you get to growth, right? So let's say the definition of growth. First, growth is not the opposite of not generating revenue, or it's not the opposite of not generating profit. So growth is something else. So in order to achieve growth, or to be on a growth path, you need to have certain elements in place that over time will always have a multiplying effect, right? Otherwise, it's a flat line. In a flat line, you can have a profitable company that is not growing, right? So we're not looking for that. We're looking for growth. So the growth now, with all of those elements in place, can be calculated with these two variables. So on one side, you say that this is exactly the same formula for SaaS, customer type of identifying growth in a regular SaaS company. So on one side, you're saying that the lifetime value for each integration, the integration that you're studying, needs to be at least 3 times the cost of the integration. Because if it's not, it means that, by the way, the lifetime value is usually calculated on a 36-month period, so 3 years. So if this doesn't happen, it means that you're losing money with that integration. So you're not generating enough revenue to pay for the cost of keeping the integration running. So in the end, you'd better just, stop the integration altogether, or just shut down the API, whatever is best. Because unless some other part of your business can pay for the costs, it's not good business. And on the other side, you need to have a payback period which is less than 12 months. So if this doesn't happen, it means that you're going to be spending so much money, and because you're not going to get the money back in less than 1 year, you'll get to a point where you run out of money, even before you reach the 3-year period. So you need to get both, and if you get both, usually 3 is a okay value. Some people and some literature talks about 4 is actually very good, and higher than 5 is, off the roof. basically. So yeah, this is, in a nutshell, but obviously I wanted to show how to get here before that. In a nutshell is applying the concepts that we know about SaaS and customers, but in this case, looking at the same concepts, but for API integrations. So for each one of those integrations.